Hey, what's up, guys? Josh here. When you're going to be watching this, most likely, is April 24th, 2019. And I'm making this today because today is the 6th anniversary of us releasing Phantom Blood Episode 1 all the way back in 2013. And so, as kind of a way to mark the occasion, I decided that as kind of a fun little treat for you guys, I'm going to do somewhat of a commentary over episode 10 of Diamond is Unbreakable, but also kind of going into my sort of my editing style and kind of how I approach an episode, including like the characters and all that kind of stuff. We're going to get right into this with episode 10. This is Let's Go Out for Italian. And here we go. Oh, and also, this is just the regular audio version that I'm going to be releasing on YouTube. If you want to watch this in the episode itself, I'm going to include a link in the description that will include a version that you can literally just mux into our Blu-ray release of episode 10, and then you can just play it straight away. You won't get any of this explanation, of course, but it'll just sync up with the episode perfectly. With that said, let's get going. You're going to want to have the episode at exactly 0 seconds, and I'm going to do 3, 2, 1, and when I would say go is when you're going to press play. So let's do it. 3, 2, 1. So this episode is a personal favorite of mine for a couple reasons. So this is one of the first episodes in JoJo where the main villain isn't really a villain at all. Also, I need to turn my audio down. It's way too loud. I'm not gonna be able to hear myself talk. There we go. Anyway, yeah. Tonio, he's a very interesting antagonist in that he's not an antagonist at all. It's basically just like kind of this whole imagined antagonism that Josuke and Okuyasu get for this character. Um, yeah, anyway, so to start off with, we have three characters in this episode, three primary characters. You have Okuyasu, who has a very sort of interesting way of speaking. And so I kind of came up with this before Diamond is Unbreakable began, before we began subbing it. And so the idea with his speaking style is it's not really modeled off of any particular way of speaking. It's a little bit of Ebonics. It's a little bit of sort of just like country, uh, just like I don't even know how to place it exactly. But kind of like sort of like a country, almost farmer, even you could say, sort of like Shigechi, who appears in a couple later episodes. Um, and so it was kind of a mishmash of all that, sort of making him very unrefined, not very intelligent. Um, and so I had a couple tricks that I used for doing that. So any words that ended in ing, um, I would, instead of having the G at the end, I would throw off the G and then put in an apostrophe, kind of like as a way of shortening how you would say the word in your head. And then also just like making certain phrases simplified, like instead of saying we have to go do this, it's we got to go do this, and that kind of thing. And so that's kind of where I put Okuyasu. Um, and then we have Tonio, the other character in this episode, and Tonio doesn't really have a very distinct style. What I did with Tonio is that I kind of made his English just a little bit awkward. It's kind of like how you might expect someone who's learned English as a second language to speak. He kind of just phrases things in somewhat unnatural ways. He doesn't sound robotic or anything, but you could tell that it's kind of it's not exactly how a native speaker would say it. A lot of people, I guess, don't seem to notice. But if you look for it, you can definitely see it. And so that kind of adds an interesting layer to him because in the manga, he actually doesn't speak any differently from the other characters. His Japanese is completely fluent. But in the anime, they gave him a little bit of an accent. And so I kind of tried to portray that in our subtitles. And I think it turned out pretty well, actually. I still like the effect, even a couple years on now. And then lastly, there's Josuke, who is the main character of Part 4, of course. And with Josuke, um, he doesn't really have like a gangster way of speaking. I know his character is sort of based off that like that kind of like Yankee Japanese gangster stereotype with like the big hair and all that kind of stuff. Um, he kind of has like a mischievous undertone and sort of has that like 80s 90s like cool sense of talking, like I don't know if he uses groovy ever. I don't think he does. But like I know he uses far out in one episode. He uses Marty McFly's famous "This is heavy" catchphrase from Back to the Future. Um, and that kind of stuff. So when I first edited Part 4 for TV, that wasn't something I had actually picked up on, surprisingly. I kind of added that for the Blu-ray version as I sort of got to like learn the character through editing. And so yeah, that's kind of how Josuke ended up turning out, and I think he turned out pretty well as well actually. Um, and so yeah, you see a lot of that with the characters. Like usually when I start editing a part for TV, it doesn't really come into its own until the second half of the series, because like even though I'm listening to the Japanese and I I'm not fluent in Japanese, I only know a little bit. I'm basically just trusting not only the Crunchyroll subtitles, but whatever my TLC gives me, basically my translation checker. Um, it's kind of just getting to know the characters, and as you sort of edit their dialogue, you kind of almost like get a sense of how they are in other situations. Like you might see how they react to something, and then you can sort of think in your head, oh, okay, so this is how they would react in this previous situation, and so their dialogue should be tweaked in this way because that's in character for them later on. And so you kind of have to form this like picture of the character in your head and apply it throughout the entire series, and that takes time to form. At least for me it does. Um, and so that's why we take a long time generally to release our Blu-ray batches, just because some characters end up changing quite significantly. Okuyasu is actually a great example of that. He didn't change a ton, probably a lot less than most people would expect, but as the series went on, I kind of refined how I dealt with his lines. And so if you go back and watch the TV versions of especially Nijimura Brothers and this episode even, you'll see it's just a little bit different. There's just a couple lines that aren't quite as unrefined sounding. They're more like a neutral type English. And so I tried to fix as much of that as possible for this Blu-ray version. Oh man, this typesetting here was a nightmare. The antipasto typesetting, and I think also there's the spaghetti alla puttanesca one. I think that one was also a little bit difficult. It looks really nice though, I have to admit. I'm pretty happy with how our typesetter Gyro handled it. Yeah, there's a couple cool examples of typesetting in this very episode actually. Like I know that there's a sign earlier in the episode for Tonio's restaurant that he subtitled, and that one looks really great as well actually. Though there's something I think that was too overly technically complex for this one. And yeah, this part I just find hilarious, how he doesn't like the tomato. I actually didn't used to be a huge fan of tomato myself, but yeah, in the right context, man, tomato can be delicious. I would totally eat that now. And that's the other thing that a lot of people comment on with this episode is just the all the food in it looks so delicious. Really, like the artists and animators at David, they did a great job at making the food in this episode look good. Like they must have focused on that quite a bit, so they really knocked it out of the park. Though this reminds me of another change that actually made from TV to Blu-ray is Okuyasu's "so good" line. That was originally fucking and I don't know why I did that originally. I just thought it was kind of like a a funny way of being like, oh, it's so good, like fucking A, like it's, just so delicious. But yeah, for the batch, Gyro rightfully pointed out that it was kind of a little too loose, and uh, it was just kind of a step too far, I guess. And so we ended up reverting it to So Good, which is what I think the Crunchyroll subs use as well. And so I don't mind it too much. I don't think it's as funny, but it still works pretty well, so no big deal. And yeah, this episode is also one that has quite a few references to pop culture. Um, I'll have to click on the screen here for a sec. I'm going to scroll down in the script and see if I can find them, because we left notes for it. Um, hmm. Yeah, here we go. So there's a reference to the movie The Champ, which I actually haven't seen yet. I probably should at some point. But yeah, I believe that's an American film. Not a very popular one from what I understand. So it's kind of interesting that Araki has seen that. Um, okay, so here's the other ones. So yeah, so he references Simon and Garfunkel, which is a famous duet. If you're American, I'm sure you've heard of them. And then there's Uchan and Nanchan, who is a famous comedic duo in Japan. I think originally there was a translation, or not a, yeah, like a translation note that kind of explained who they were. I think we got rid of that. But yeah, that was there. Can't really offer much more outside of that. And then also he references the famous manga Ashita no Joe, aka Tomorrow's Joe, which is like a boxing manga about this guy named Joe as he kind of like works his way up, and it's a very shonen jump type series. And basically what he's talking about is that the two guys, Takamori Asao and Chiba Tetsuya, they worked on the series together. One was illustrator, one was writer. And so, yeah. I remember that the Crunchyroll translation completely missed the point of that line, so we had to kind of fix that up. But they usually don't do stuff like that anymore, thankfully. I believe there was also another reference in this episode that was kind of weird. I don't know if I'll be able to find it. Oh yeah, yeah. So this is coming up in just a minute, but I'll start to explain it now. So um, when Okuyasu starts to eat the spicy pasta, he mentions the Setsubun festival, and so what that is that in Japan there is a festival where you basically eat these types of beans that aren't very tasty, and the idea is that you're supposed to eat your age in the beans. And so he says basically that it's so that you start eating them and you don't like them, but then you just keep going and going until you've eaten a whole bag. And so it's not really as obvious if you're not familiar with it, but basically it's just kind of another way of showing how stupid Okuyasu is, because if you're eating a whole bag beyond your age, it's like, because they taste terrible from what I understand, they're not good. So it's because it's like it's meant for little kids, right? Like if you're only 9 or 10 years old, you only have to eat like 10 beans, which really is not a lot. So just kind of a funny little character moment that's lost a little bit in translation. Um, we did leave a note for it though, so it, at least if you take the time to read the note, you can kind of get it. It kind of loses the comedic punch when you have to read it like that, but it's one of those cases where there's not really anything you can do about it. Another interesting thing about this episode actually is that this is the first episode that employs quite a bit of Italian in the dialogue. And so when we did this episode, we actually specifically decided how we were going to handle Italian text because of part 5, which we're actually working on as of me making this commentary. And so a couple things you'll notice is that we do not translate any of the Italian into English. It's all left in Italian. there's no translation notes to explain what the Italian means, and Italian locations are using their Western English equivalents. So, Naples rather than what is it, like Neapolis? I think is the Japanese version, or Napoli would be the normal Italian. And so yeah, so we decided all of this all the way back in like 2016 to later use for part five. So that's kind of an interesting little detail, I guess. Because yeah, like I mean, with everything that we've done, at least since part three or four, we've been very forward thinking with how we handle certain aspects of the series, knowing that later on they could be making a return because it has bitten us in the ass a little bit in the past. Like for example, um, the name of Joseph's company. I think in part three we called it Joestar Real Estate. But then in part four, we decided it would be better to call it Joestar Realty. And so if we ever redid part three, we would probably just make them all Joestar Realty. But it's that kind of thing that you have to really think about when you're working on a series like JoJo, just because there's so much connectivity to future stuff and to past stuff that if you decide to go one way, it could end up affecting stuff that happens years later. And so in a couple cases, we've had to choose to either live with decisions we made years ago or just kind of scrap it completely. And we definitely have done that. I don't like to do it, but it's just kind of an inevitability when you're working on a series for this long. Because like I said, we're now 6 years out from when we released Phantom Blood episode 1. It's been a long time for us. So stuff like that just tends to change. Also, this scene I love. Araki's sense of body horror in this episode is just fucking fantastic. I love it. I don't know if it's a reference to any movie in particular. It wouldn't surprise me if it is, but I've always enjoyed this episode for that reason. It's just so nasty and disgusting. I think also parts of it were censored for the TV release. I know at least like when you see like the crater in his skin, when he's like scratching it all off, I know that was originally censored. And I think also when the scenes with like the puppy and his guts, that was also originally censored. It's been nice actually, because for part five there's been a lot less of that kind of censorship going on. So hopefully that will keep up for the rest of the series, because I'm not going to be having any manga spoilers for this episode. Even for part five, actually, I'm not going to talk about part five really. There is a lot of violence coming up. I'll say that much. Quite a bit of violence. So hopefully that's not going to be too badly censored. Another thing, actually, I guess I can comment on right now is our use of swearing. This is surprisingly to me been a very big source of controversy with our subs for some reason. Um, and so I'll explain why we do that. So for those of you who are aware, JoJo originally ran in a magazine called Weekly Shonen Jump, and that magazine is generally targeted at children. I would say the age range is about probably about like 10 to 15 or 16, something like that. It's around like middle school to high school level. You do have a lot of people who read it well beyond that age, but generally the demographic is sort of like that younger boy range. Um, and so some people may wonder, like, why are you including swearing when it's if you're using words like fucking, shit, and cunt and all that kind of stuff, it kind of makes it firmly R-rated. Um, the reason for that is twofold. One is that the content in JoJo is not appropriate for that age range in the US at all. So even though in Japan, they at the time didn't mind that kind of excessive violence in JoJo being shown to children, um, in America it never would have flied. They just wouldn't have done it. And so it's already in that respect just completely cut off from children, unless you're an adult and you're showing this to your kid, which I think is fine. I don't think JoJo is so scarring or inappropriate that you couldn't show it to a kid. But a lot of Americans probably wouldn't want to. Um, and so anyway, so it was that coupled with that later on for part 7 in particular, JoJo shifted to a magazine called Ultra Jump, which is still owned by Shueisha, which owns Shonen Jump. And so in that magazine, Araki's had a little more freedom to include more mature content. But it actually hasn't been that much different from what he did in Weekly Shonen Jump. Like, there's been a little bit more nudity, and also, like, some people say that, like, Part 8 doesn't really fit into that sort of, like, Weekly Shonen Jump mold. So, for that reason, I kind of feel like if I'm saying that Part 7 and Part 8 are adult series that can include swearing, I don't think it really, to me, it says that there's not really enough of a distinction between the earlier and the later parts that I shouldn't be including swearing for them. And so that's the main reason why I have. So I try not to go too overboard with it. I don't make everyone swear just because I like it. Honestly, I actually find it more interesting to edit characters who don't swear at all. And so I just kind of use it as appropriate now. Some people have argued that for part 1, 2, and 3, we kind of went a little overboard, and that may be true. But I have tried to kind of tone it down now for parts 4 and 5. So, yeah, I don't think it's a huge deal. I know some people get really worked up about swearing. I don't really care either way. So, I just include it because in a lot of cases, I think it does quite a bit to lend characterization. Like with Okuyasu, for example, he swears so much. He uses the word fuck so much in basically every context of the word you can imagine that I didn't feel like it was like nasty. It was more just a way of showing that he's kind of a stupid character. He's uncultured. So of course he's going to be swearing and using fucking shit and all that all the time. So I don't mind it. And I think it's easy enough to change it anyway if you want to. Like, if you go into AG Sub and sort of open up the script, you can make your own version. Get rid of all the swearing. I don't care. You can do what you want. So, if it bothers you anyway. I don't think it bothers most people that watch us now, though, just because it's been such a long time. So, yeah, I just thought I would explain that. Hopefully that makes it a little bit clearer. I have explained it in text before, but, maybe hopefully this will get a little bit more traction, especially since it's going to be on YouTube. But yeah, it looks like this episode is about to end. Thanks everyone who's been watching us this whole time. I don't say it a whole lot, but really I greatly appreciate everyone who has watched us and had kind words for us on IRC, Discord, our site. I wouldn't say I do it for the fans. I don't like to think of the people who watch us as fans. Like, I just do this for my own enjoyment. I'm a huge fan of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I have been now for the last 5+ years. I don't see that changing anytime soon. And I'd like to keep subbing it. So maybe, for our 10th anniversary, I can come out with another anniversary project like this that I can hopefully share with you guys. So yeah, once again, thanks for watching. I don't really know what else to say. I don't do commentaries like this very often, so hopefully I didn't come off as too awkward or anything. But yeah, thanks for watching. Keep watching. And as always, if you have any feedback about our releases, feel free to hop on our Discord server. I'm on there pretty much every single day, and I'll respond to anything you ask. So go ahead, don't be a stranger, and thanks. I'll see you guys online.